An overview, very short overview about property development activity that Network Rail are involved with, in particular releasing land for housing. I think I'd like to probably get maybe 3 points across in particular. Network Rail, I think at the moment this is probably a great time to be involved with property development with the rail industry and Network Rail. Second point is the property team in the organisation have put together a real significant programme package of opportunities for the market, for the development world. And it's a great time to be involved with that programme. And I think the third point is around being open for business. And it's interesting to hear about collaboration before. Network Rail is very much open for business, not just in the property world, but its whole rail operations. And if I just touch on the Network Rail core business first before I talk about property, just some stats up there on the slides around the size of the organisation, Network Rail managing the UK's rail infrastructure operation. I only want to draw your attention particularly to the point in bold, which is the £130 million a week that's being invested into rail infrastructure. So that's not operations and maintenance and the day-to-day running of the infrastructure. That's actual investment to improve the resilience and the capacity of the network across the UK. Literally thousands of improvement projects going on in a 5-year programme and a programme to go beyond that too. And they are literally all over the country. So quite a significant investment with quite significant benefits and outputs that come out of this for all regions of the country. There's a particular point I think on there about London as we're here. By 2020, a fair chunk of these improvements will lead to improvement in peak capacity around the network by about 30% within 2 to 3 years. Around 16 of the busiest rail links around the UK will have much more frequent travel time. So quite significant improvements. And the reason why that's happening, as you all well know, passenger journeys, the demand on the rail is growing significantly, much more than was ever anticipated 20, 30 years ago when there was a significant underinvestment in the rail infrastructure. That world has completely changed. So we're in a place now where I understand about 1.8 billion passenger journeys a year are undertaken on the network. And incredibly, that's set to grow, according to trends and research, to about 3 billion by 2040, I think it says, 2040. That's a significant increase. So clearly a need to make sure the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, works well with all the remaining infrastructure around the UK. And it's at the same time, there's increasing urbanisation and an increasing flow of people to live and work within urban areas. And again, trends suggest that within sort of 10, 15 years, 92% of the UK population, the growing UK population, will be living in urban areas. So therefore a need for real investment right now. As well as the investment, I think it's just worth mentioning that the Chief Executive for Network Rail, Mark Kahn, and Sir Peter Hendy, the Chairman, have been really keen for Network Rail as a whole operation, just put to one side property development for a minute, the whole operation of Network Rail to be really open for business. Delivering that kind of infrastructure, Network Rail recognises it can't do it on its own, really needs to work closely with all sorts of industry stakeholders, local authorities, train operating companies, local communities, the whole gambit. And Network Rail really needs to be open and close to people to get into a place where it's delivering better things and more things. So really open for business for Network Rail. For Network Rail property, I think the team would like to think it's been external and open for business for some time. It's been in a place where it's released land for housing for many, many years, and before it, Rail Track, and before it, British Rail. Historically, Network Rail has taken an approach where it has individual sites and take those individual sites to a sort of certain appropriate level of planning certainty, resolving all the operational issues, and then putting those sites out to the market. And these sites range from sort of 10 to 15 units through to 400, 500, 600 units for house building. So that's been the historical approach. of those single site, and it still remains quite a core part of their business. But the team have also recognised it needs to change and innovate as well. And in more recent years has introduced a joint venture approach, which has started over the last few years to actually deliver sites. Focusing, there's several JVs out there. I've just got a slide on here about the Solent regeneration, which was the first one. Focuses on London and the South East area. 10 locations that it's been working on. Delivered 2 sites for around 200 homes with ancillary retail, but also improvements to station facilities as well. And currently on site at Twickenham and Walthamstow. In fact, Matthew, if you don't mind just going back a slide, possibly the most boring photograph. If you go back one more. The most boring photograph you may well have seen today is that slab, concrete slab. And the reason it was put in there was that it's just been built across Twickenham, the Twickenham tracks, believed to be the first raft over a railway for some considerable time. As small as it might be, it's not on the Liverpool Street Broadgate scale, but it's quite a key step for us. So the team are quite proud of it, so apologies, it was the most boring photograph today. You can just move on again a couple of slides. It's at Twickenham. That's Manchester, Victoria. So just finishing off with Solent, it's also recently got 2 planning consents to build over 1,000 homes in 2 locations, Bishop Stortford and Guildford. Interestingly, with the Bishop Stortford site, the Solent team, this is a joint venture with Kier Property, by the way, it's a 50-50 joint venture with Kier Property. The Solent team felt it worked really well with the local authority to achieve planning consent on quite a significant scheme at Bishop Stortford. As it got to the consent, they actually lost out on it for some understandable reasons from the local authority. And it was an interesting lesson to learn for the team because they thought they were talking the same language and having the same right conversations with the local authority. Clearly not quite the case. What was great there, though, the local authority were really keen to make sure a development happened here, but it happened in the right way. So quite a good structure was put in place between the local authority and the Solent team to make sure that the full detail of the application was absolutely spot on for the needs of the local community. And it sailed through the next time with the planning consent, and the team are really pleased to be cracking on with that scheme now. So that's joint ventures. We've also introduced more recently a multi-site package, and these are a handful of sites in a multi-site package. Not quite a joint venture as such. Network Rail isn't putting equity into this approach, but it's bundling together 4, 5, 6 sites in a particular geography, sorting out a certain amount of the planning issues, but certainly sorting out all the operational technical clearance issues to, if you like, put the red line around these sites, bundle them up and put them to a market. The reason for the bundling is to see if we can just accelerate things, be a bit more efficient, more cost effective, and develop good relations with the developer over a broader range of sites rather than just the single site approach. So we've got a multi-site package out there at the moment. Another one will be released later on this year, and if all goes well, 2 more will go out in 2019. So single site approach, joint venture approach, multi-site package. Overall, over the last couple of years, the team have released land for 4,000 homes to be built. Been working very hard on the programme behind that as well for the future, and really quite positive around achieving the target which we set ourselves actually by March 2020 to deliver land for 12,000 homes across the country. So a significant programme of activity, over 250 sites literally spread all across the UK. If you don't mind, just pause a second. I don't want to dwell and focus on these 2 schemes too much, but I couldn't really come to a presentation and not mention London Euston. It's often been referred to as potentially once in a generation opportunity, which I guess in some ways it is. But we're also looking very closely at Clapham Junction and the potential for resolving what is one of the most difficult, busiest, not particularly nice places, stations in the UK. These are tremendously complex, hugely costly schemes to resolve to try and regenerate these two particular areas. And I referred to the Twickenham slab across 2 tracks. You can imagine the complexity of trying to raft over Euston Station and Clapham Junction, really significant. But if we just go to the next slide, I think where I'd really like to sort of focus more attention on is the wider regeneration opportunities. Euston and Clapham, 2 massively significant schemes. You'll have seen schemes being delivered at King's Cross and Birmingham and more recently London Bridge, which are all largely about retail. But there's actually a much bigger opportunity, I think, for, well, the whole of the UK, in fact, really, not just Network Rail. And that's about regeneration in places around the country such as York, Bristol, Plymouth, Swindon, Newcastle. There's a whole host of locations where there's a real opportunity for regeneration. You may or may not be surprised to know, though, that Network Rail's land ownership in most urban locations, if virtually all, not all urban locations, is really restricted. It's really restricted to the narrow confines of the railway tracks, the station, and maybe some ancillary buildings and land around it. So for Network Rail to drive those opportunities, it's not really in the best position. It really needs to work very closely and collaboratively with a whole range of stakeholders. And it might be worth just sort of touching on the red blob in the middle there. Not the best image, I'm afraid, of Bristol Temple Meads. But the purpose of it was just to give an indication of an aerial shot of the whole area. This is a vision for the Bristol Temple Quarter. Some of you may be aware of it. It's a 100-hectare site. Network Rail's ownership, you take away the tracks and the station, is nominal. It's in the very small percentages. To enable this kind of scheme to happen, there needs to be a real collaboration with Bristol City Council, Homes England, West of England Combined Authority, the university, in order to get this major regeneration scheme off the ground. And what's been quite interesting is that all the various parts, and again it's interesting to hear about collaboration before, Network Rail wants to see a new station facility with better retail, better services for the passengers that use the area. The university building a new campus on the other side of the tracks, as it were. The railway's acting as a bit of a barrier, as a bit of a blocker. It's often seen that way by its nature. So we need to help the university have the through flows into the right side of the city. Bristol want to see regeneration of the area. Homes England want to see new housing, and they've got an invested interest in the area. So all those various parties have a real interest in seeing change. The only way those individual things will happen is if everyone works together. And what's been quite interesting there is there has been that collaborative approach. All those various parties I've talked about have sort of taken that step back and realised this can't be done in isolation. All the right kind of people, the right kind of attitude have got in the room and come to the place where there's a real clear vision for Bristol Temple Meads and a series of goals which everybody's bought into below that. And interestingly, not a single lawyer has been appointed yet. Everyone's just got on with it and agreed this is the right way to go. And everyone's invested a bit of time and a bit of money and a bit of effort just to get into that visionary place first before getting into the real detail of how it's going to be delivered. So I thought I would just end on that point because I think that kind of framework, that kind of model is a fantastic framework. And it, frankly, actually, it sort of puts Network Rail into a different place than it may have been 10 years ago. It's not funded to deal with wider regeneration. It's not funded to deal with wider socio-economic developments around the areas. But it's really keen to get involved where it can. But it really needs to work closely and collaboratively with probably many of you here, actually. So that was a very quick overview of property development with Network Rail. It is a great time at the moment. Lots of good stuff to be delivered. And Network Rail really wants to deliver great regeneration and great places, working with people across the country.
Okay, Nigel, thank you so much.